I want to talk about science and the difference that's making. Digitization, or if you like, algorithms or computation, is bringing in science after science, powerful new instruments or powerful new technologies that can see whether it's what happened at the beginning of the cosmos, whether it's what's happening in the human brain or in animal brains, or whether it's what's happening, say, in the oceans. We're getting scientific technologies that did not exist 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We're seeing new phenomena, and we're seeing complete new worlds we barely knew existed. So I think this is going to be a golden era for science. I think we will look back on this era, and it will be possibly like the 1600s when we began to see so much. The thing that fascinates me, I'm really a systems theorist, and what fascinates me is that computation or digitization is altering the way we understand systems. Think of systems of highly interconnected setups, whatever they are, entities, the immune system, the traffic system, a galactic system. 100 years ago, if we wanted to understand how systems evolved over time or changed over time, we had to do it pencil and paper. It was pretty slow. You could get a set of equations. You worked things out. If you were a superb mathematician, say like Poincaré, you could get some insights. Now all of us can take a system, put it on the computer, and do computer experiments and watch how that system plays out on the screen. We're not so much looking to say what's going to happen in the future. We're looking for phenomena. We're looking for patterns. We're looking for changes, things we wouldn't expect. I've been doing this. I did start off earlier in my career, pencil and paper very much. But from the 1980s on, all of us have been using computation. And there have been quite a few surprising things we saw. Quite unexpectedly, we saw far more threshold effects than we had expected. System might go along looking very okay, and then suddenly, bump, it might enter quite a different phase or something very different. Like going along in traffic, maybe quite dense traffic on a highway, suddenly there's a traffic jam. You didn't expect it. We're seeing this all over the place, threshold effects. We're seeing what you would call phase shifts. Rerun the experiment, change, twiddle the parameters a little bit, nothing, nothing, nothing. And then one tiny tweak, suddenly the whole regime, what we see is completely different. Now these are giving us profound insights into our own world. What we also see, and I found this unexpected, is once we could use algorithms and look at our world unfolding or evolving, we began to see that the worlds we were looking at were organic. The game of life, if you know Conway's Game of Life, it's a little computer algorithm, looks very life-like. If you look at some other system, it may look like a river basin getting carved out. So we're seeing things that are unexpectedly lifelike and organic. And for me, the biggest surprise of all that came up with computation was that we could start with relatively simple rules. I'm thinking of cellular automata here. You don't need to know what those are. Just think of it as a very simple system that's unfolding over time. You could give different types of rules. For some rules, you could predict what's going to happen in 1,000 steps or 1,000,000 steps. But for nearly all the rules you can cook up, there is no way to predict other than allow the system to compute its way and see what happens. This is a major shocker. This is not a casual result saying, well, there's imprecision built into the computer as well. You're not sure if you're entering the correct numbers. These are theorems in mathematics that are extraordinarily powerful. For most systems that are non-linear, take some system or rules at random, chances are the way they work out is no more predictable than waiting and seeing. So if we got the perfect equations for the climate system, we're not even sure if those equations would lead to anything predictable. We may simply have to wait and see. There's another thing that surprised me, and this is just sitting and mulling over what's happened. And I think that computation is causing a very deep and scarcely noticed transition in science itself, the way we think about the sciences. And that is subtle, but very, very deep. And that is that the sciences, and I go right across from neuroscience, biological science, physical sciences, cosmology, economics, whatever you want, they're being based less and less on equations and more on algorithms. I find this thrilling and exciting, slightly disconcerting, surprising. So let me explain a little bit by what I mean. At the very start of the 1600s, 1600, people around who were doing pretty good science, Descartes was still a child at the time, but they thought geometrically. Kepler worked geometrically, Galileo largely geometrically, and it wasn't until later in the 1600s, but it was a slow transition throughout that century, that more and more science began to be based on equations. Late in the century, 1687, Newton did his theory of planetary motions, the Principia. He did it in equations, cooked up calculus for the purpose. Then he went back so that he could make it look scientific, expressed it all in geometry. Now, something very similar has happened in the 1900s. Alan Turing comes along with, I think, the most influential paper in mathematics in 1936, or an extraordinarily influential paper, showing that we could have something called algorithms, step-by-step instructions for a system, if you like, to go through and calculate itself out. I read the paper. I don't think the word algorithms actually used in the paper, but nevertheless, the thoughts are extremely clear. So think of algorithms this way. After Newton, we had equational systems. We had something on the left-hand side that told us how to update the system in equations. The equations were on the right-hand side. Those equations applied, and everything would work its way out. You could add some probabilistic terms later on if you wanted. What Turing introduced was using equations again, called an algorithm. But those equations would describe a system that was changing, and that system could react to its internal changes. He introduced if-then rules. So if something happened, then you could use a different set of equations, or something different might happen. And this led to a world, if you like, of equations, the base of any algorithm, working their way out, but reconfiguring and changing and adapting themselves to the conditions that they had created. That's the world that we're moving into. It opens a much, much wider world. A greatly wider world where we have the benefits of geometry, we have the benefits of equations, but we have the benefits of equations that are reacting to the circumstances they themselves have brought about. There are profound implications for this, philosophical ones, but there are profound connections with biology. The biological system is a system that unfolds, but reacts to its own unfolding. And so I would go as far as saying that the base classical science we have, when I was small, we used to think of physics as being the science. Everything had to be like physics. That's changing, and we're looking much more to biology as inspiring us, and computer science. That can change again. My point is that we are starting to think much more biologically, we are thinking algorithmically, and everything is starting to be based on information. There's a huge subject that I am fascinated by called algorithmic information theory, but it's basically what is the science of describing systems when it's information that counts? So to put some of this in slogan terms, biology is basically the steady transformation of information. And just to perplex you a little bit, I love this quote from Gregory Chaitin, who said this here in NTU about 3 or 4 months ago. He says, biology is much more mathematical than mathematics. Thank you very much.